We are going live only now.
Okay.
Hey everyone, I think we are live now, but if you can see me, hear me, if the streaming is on, just let me know in the chat or in the comments. All right. So thanks for joining us. I think we're live. I think people can see us and hear us. I see you in a different window. Can we start with like a quick introduction? Can you walk us through, when you wrote the GMAT and what you're doing now, so that people know just a little bit about you, and you'll get to know more about you as the session progresses.
Of course, yeah. Hey, Swetha, good evening. And hey, everyone, good evening. And thank you so much for joining this live stream today. I was just telling Swetha before we started that it feels surreal for me to be doing this because it seems like not too long ago, like just a few years ago, I was like doing the GMAT myself at Wizako and taking classes from Swetha, actually. So to be now at USC doing the MBA feels like, really surreal. And I'm so excited to be joining all of you today and happy to answer any of your questions. So to quickly tell you a bit about myself, I'm originally from Chennai in India. I did my bachelor's in computer science engineering and worked in a product marketing role for one of India's largest software companies, Zoho, for a few years. Around the time I was finishing about 2.5 years at work, I felt that I might want to do the MBA in the near future. At that point in time, I was still figuring things out in terms of where I wanted to do the MBA and what exactly my career goals would be. But I knew that I had this general tingling feeling that I would want to do it in the near term. So I decided to, do the GMAT in 2018. I think it was in October that I finished the exam. And I scored a 730. So I was relieved to get that out of the way to hopefully apply in a year. Went on to apply to a few schools in 2019, got an admit to USC with a decent scholarship and, was pretty convinced to take it at that point after having some conversations with Swetha, who was, of course, a student at USC back then. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. So I had to actually defer my admission. And I joined last year in fall 2021. And so I'm a first year student at Marshall right now, just finishing up actually the final term, which concludes next month in May. And I will be interning this summer in a strategy role at Adobe. So really excited to make that, pivot or advancement in my career, if you'd like, from working in product marketing to getting into a more strategic role within the tech industry. And yeah, really excited to be here and chat with all of you this morning for me in LA.
Thank you, Sidharth. It's very early in the morning on a Friday morning when you don't have classes. So we're cutting in on your weekend. And I'm super glad that you were able to take the time off on an early morning, right? And spend it with us. Really happy for that. And congratulations on the Adobe internship. That's fantastic. It's a great opportunity, and I'm sure you're going places. And just being a viewer on this journey and watching you grow has been fantastic. And I'm sure that a lot of our viewers will also have questions for you. I have a couple of questions before we get started. You said that you knew you wanted to do something, like you're not sure exactly what, but you knew you had to do something. When does that clarity come in your mind to say, oh, I'm going to go into strategy, or I'm going to write the GMAT? Because for a lot of people who are writing the GMAT, I'm sure a lot of us don't have very clear plans, and that poses a deterrent, right? So when did the clarity come for you personally?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I can really relate to that because I was on the same boat where, even right now, I'm still figuring out exactly what I want to do. Like, it's like a progressive process of figuring out what you want to do in your career. So in my case, I think back in 2018, when I had finished a couple of years at work, I was pretty happy with my job, honestly, and I felt like I was doing well and it was quite fulfilling, honestly. But I think there was just this feeling that, perhaps in the future, I would want to like explore new functions, get into more leadership and strategic roles. And at that point, it was just a general hunch that I might want to do it over the next few years. And I think which is why the GMAT is like an amazing exam, because you get that flexibility where you can, get the score out, get the exam out of the way, get a good score, and you kind of have that option for 5 years to then decide when you want to do the MBA. So in my case, because I was able to get the score in 2018, I knew that, okay, I could do it in 2019, 2020, 2021, and I was quite flexible on that. So when it came to 2019, I decided that, I finished at that point more than 3 years at work. And I figured if I worked another year, I might be at a point where, I would have achieved what I wanted to in my role that I was back then. And I would want to like explore, new avenues for growth. And there was also a part of me that was considering, moving abroad to have, that experience of studying in the US and maybe even working here for some time. And then coming into the MBA program itself, I think the program is designed pretty well to help you explore various options in your initial few months via various student clubs. So it was more like I went through that process. I was, looking at consulting, a little bit of finance, a little bit of like tech and product management, and then, trying to find that sweet spot where I felt I could, both bring my skills to the table and also feel excited about doing something new. So it's still, if I'm very honest with you, it's still a process that, you keep going through throughout business school and probably beyond. I know some of my classmates have a lot of clarity in terms of they come in with this clear plan. They've worked, for example, maybe in like data science or data analytics, and they know they want to get into product management, and they have like a very cohesive story on why they want to make that pivot. But honestly, in the like very practically, a lot of us in school, including myself, are still like working through what we want to do. But I think the program is designed really well to like help you figure that out along the way.
Reassuring, honestly, because for a lot of people, you hear the stories of people who were very committed to that one path, who
Right.
prepare for 1 month, crack the GMAT, got a 750, and then boom, 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 everything works out for them. So that's the kind of success stories that you hear. And that can actually be a little overwhelming for some people who are preparing, because you're like, I don't know what I want to do. So do I do an MBA? So it's nice that the MBA program actually allows you to explore, and that you had the time and the bandwidth to not just explore strategy roles, but consulting and finance. That's all over the board.
Right.
But you will have the bandwidth to find out who you are, and now you're able to decide on a path and move ahead. So that's really fantastic. So we do have question in the chat. We'll take that question, and then I have a few more questions for you.
Sure.
Tima is asking, do you think that there are full ride scholarships that are available for someone who's done a BBA in US chapter schools? Do you have thoughts on that, Sid?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I genuinely don't think there's any specific criteria in terms of like your educational background or your work experience and correlating that with your chances to get a scholarship or a full ride. I mean, obviously it's not easy to get a full ride, like that goes without saying, but it's not that a specific background advantages or disadvantages you. To be honest, in my experience, it seems that a lot of schools, including Marshall, put a lot of emphasis on the GMAT score when deciding scholarships. Like obviously getting the admission is like this package of like various things about you, like your educational background, your academic scores, your GMAT score, your work experience, essays, interviews, etc. But it seems like in terms of getting a scholarship, from what I've seen, at least in my case and a lot of other people I knew, typically they seem to put a lot of weightage on the GMAT score. and that's presumably because a lot of schools are trying to like attract students with higher scores sometimes to improve their own I guess metrics and class profile to do better in the rankings. So yeah, I mean it's really like you could have a engineering degree or a BBA or a CA or anything, and it should not really by itself affect your chances to get a scholarship.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sid. Just based on my experience as someone who's helped people get there and join different MBA programs, I think it's the whole package that has a determining factor. We have another person in the chat who's from a physics background and is asking whether that would hinder them from getting a scholarship. So it doesn't matter what your undergrad is. That's one of the actually lower ranking metrics, I would say, right? It's your GMAT score, it's how you write your application essays, and it's your work experience that has a bigger weightage in terms of the scholarship. So I have a lot of questions where people are asking for their profile, and they're asking, for this profile, what sort of scholarship should I go for, or what sort of schools I should apply to. Guys who are watching us and listening, I encourage you to ask questions to Sid based on his experience. I would take questions that are more focused on his GMAT preparation and journey, because we want to make sure that he's comfortable and has the expertise that he can guide you with. So if you think of him as someone who's a student who's going through the MBA program, and please ask questions on preparation, right? While I wait for those questions, I have one for you, Sid. The whole COVID thing, that threw a large dent in your plans, and there was a lot of diversions. You mentioned that you deferred your MBA. How did it impact your decisions? And did it have any impact on your MBA journey?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think mostly for a lot of, like for me and a lot of my friends in my cohort, it was just this very stressful experience of, back in 2020, trying to figure out if we could even leave India during the pandemic and come to the US, because all the, visa processing was closed, and even the school didn't know how to handle the situation back then. There were uncertainties around whether our scholarships would be deferred if we couldn't join in 2020. It eventually worked out okay, and Marshall, I think, was one of the few schools where they, unconditionally deferred your scholarship if you weren't able to make it because of COVID. And I was very keen to get that in-person experience. So it was, for me, it was a no-brainer to, defer my admission. Partly because I was not, hell-bent on, starting the MBA in 2020, in the sense that I was quite flexible because, like I mentioned earlier, for me it was still an evolving process in terms of figuring out my goals. So I could still see myself, waiting out that extra year in India, continuing my job, trying a few other like freelance projects as well, and still, build my profile to be more successful during the MBA. So for me personally, that year was good in terms of being able to do a lot of self-reflection about my career, about my personal life, to then be able to take stock of where I am in my journey, and just be more robust when I joined the MBA. But I think it's been mixed experiences for most people, because I think in my cohort about like 90 to 95% of international students actually deferred. So I think normally you get about 30 to 40% of the class being internationals. But my previous class, which is the class of 2023, they had just like 12% internationals, because I think most international students want to come to the US to have that in-person experience. So yeah, most people ended up deferring. And it was just a little stressful, I think, during that phase when we were, trying to figure out whether it would be possible to get a visa and travel. What would happen to, the learning experience? Would it be in person, hybrid, or remote? So it most of us just ended up deferring, and we are very glad that we ended up coming in this year, because I think the previous classes obviously got a little affected in terms of recruiting during the pandemic, when a lot of companies were halting or sort of putting a temporary pause, at least in terms of their internship recruiting or some industries for full-time roles as well. But I think we came in at the right time where, the job market is insanely good right now. Like, especially in some industries like tech and consulting, it's like there's just so much demand for talent, for MBA talent in the US. And I think it worked out well for like most of us, especially international students from India and other countries, where a big motivator for us is to come to the US to get that dream flagship MBA job. And I think it's worked out very well for the most part for my class. The outcomes are excellent in terms of the kinds of companies, the kinds of like salary packages. Because I mean, the job market is just so robust. It's like companies are like, we need so many people. So I think it worked out well in the end for most of us. And I have absolutely no regrets deferring my admission.
I'm glad things worked out for you. I have a couple of follow-up questions, but let's talk about the last thing that you just mentioned about the job market being very robust, because I think that is one of the biggest concerns in this COVID world. You keep hearing of people getting laid off on Zoom by the thousands, right? So how is the job market? And when you say it's robust, can you go into a little bit more details? Is this a good time to do your MBA? Even if you're starting off now, is this a good time in terms of your opportunities?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, now is as good a time as any, to be honest. I think with job markets, it's always quite like cyclical, right? Where you have parts where some years when, things are just a little slow because like growth and the economy is like just slowing down, or some industries are like underperforming. And I think in some, if I'm, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the last few years, there was this time when the MBA itself was losing its sheen a little bit. I think probably in the mid 2010s to you saw like a decline in MBA applications to some of the top schools in the US, which was, I guess, a concern for these schools back then. And people were looking at other alternatives to be able to get to their goals. But I think right now it's been an uptick in the last couple of years. Like ever since the pandemic happened and things settled down, like obviously during the pandemic, everything was like, disrupted for like a few months. And obviously like, a couple of classes before mine would have felt the biggest impact for that. So I know obviously in the couple of years ago when the pandemic happened, a lot of students had a difficult time kind of navigating through the internship phase because companies were, rescinding offers or at least doing temporary pauses in hiring. But if any of you have seen the stock market since then, it honestly, if you were like invested like in NASDAQ stocks or like in the tech stocks in the US, your returns have been better than any time before. Like it's been insane. Like you see the growth of companies like Amazon and Google and Microsoft and Apple, they're all crossed $1 trillion market caps in the last couple of years. And look at the SaaS industry, Salesforce, Adobe, even other tech companies like Cisco and Splunk and some of these smaller names as well. They have done so well and they've grown and become so important during these pandemic times that these companies need a ton of talent coming in for like various growth plans that they have. So they're hiring by huge numbers from MBA programs right now. So, and I think that trend will continue for the next 2 to 3 years, and then you potentially would have like another cycle where maybe like in 2026 or 2027 it slows down a little bit again, and that's just how it works, right? So in that sense, based on my best understanding, like now is as good a time as any to be in school or join school like this fall, even next year, and sort of continue to ride that wave of this insane growth that we're seeing. Like this is unheard of, like $1 trillion market cap companies. Like it's the best time, especially if you're looking at tech consulting. Yeah, this is your time, honestly.
Yeah, usually I agree that there is a cyclical effect to it, and there is some sort of an external factor like the pandemic that impacts and brings down some sort of a slowdown and a recession, and then things grow boom. So If you are thinking of preparing for the GMAT, then looks like you need to start applying as soon as possible and get on this wave. Yes, the results, the numbers that are coming out, that's the thing among his cohort, and we are seeing from different schools. This is really fantastic numbers in terms of the recruitment by a single company, overall numbers, the placements and salary packages and so on. So that's really gratifying news, because when I was in school, the class of 2020 and 21 were probably the most impacted in terms of the rescinding of the offers that you were mentioning earlier. So it's very gratifying to see the market recover. I'm going to take a couple of questions from the chat.
Sure.
We have a question, can a low grad score, so I think we're talking about their undergrad score, and a GMAT 720 plus get you an admit into a B school like USC?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for full disclosure, like I didn't have like a great undergrad score myself. So, and I think a lot of us, especially, coming from India, like if we do an undergrad, like engineering or something, not all of us may be like fully invested during our undergrad, because like, we are like 17, 18 years old, and like, we still are, I guess, not that mature, yeah, absolutely. Right. So, I genuinely don't think they hold that against you, because like I had a pretty low score myself. I think it definitely helps to get a good GMAT score in such cases though, because, in my case and in many of my friends' examples, like people get good GMAT scores to, I guess, overcome any weakness in their profile, so to speak. Because I think once you get a good GMAT score, the school is really looking at it going, okay, you know what, this person obviously is good and can handle the academic load because they have a good score. So I'm not so concerned about, a low GPA, because circumstances might have been different then. I think with the MBA, it's a little less important to have like a high undergraduate score, because most people are coming in with 4 or 5 years of experience. So, the focus is on your more recent achievements, which will tend to be like your work achievements, your GMAT score, and your future goals as well. So no one is going to go back to, back when you were 18, you got like a low score, or you got, you failed in an exam. Like it's quite, I'm not saying it's like unimportant entirely. So if you have a good score, it can definitely like be a plus point in your profile. But honestly, like I don't really see this as an emphasis from the schools in terms of scrutinizing students for their undergraduate like performance.
Right. The kind of question that I wanted to follow up and ask is what made you choose USC when you applied with the 730? Like other than the conversations we had.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, I think a huge decision-making factor for me was obviously speaking with you a couple of years ago and getting like that first-hand experience, which I guess created a much more stronger sense of connection with the school for me. But in terms of at a higher level, the way I was looking at it was as someone who had traveled a lot for work around the world, and as someone who enjoys being in a global city and being around people from different cultures, I started off by looking at schools in major global cities, right? Like think New York, Toronto, LA. So it was for me, like that was like a really important thing, that if I was leaving India, which was a big decision for me back then, and it still is, for me, it would have to be in a place where I can truly feel excited to be in, beyond just like the school. And then in terms of what I wanted out of the MBA was really a lifelong network. I think a lot of us, of course, it's very different how it works, like back in India in terms of how business schools operate. But I think in the US, it's really like, the cliched saying of your network is your net worth is so true. Like your network really opens up opportunities in the US. So for me, it was really important to join a school that had a strong sense of community and alumni network. A school where alumni really wanted to engage with the students and give back to improving the outcomes of the next batches of students. So I'd heard so much about USC's Trojan Alumni Network, and so that was really important for me in terms of being able to decide, what I want out of my experience was, I want to be in a place which is global. I want to be in a school which really has that sense of community and alumni engagement where I can build connections. As someone who's moving out of India, moving to a new country, you want to be in a place where you're able to quickly reach out to people, make these connections, because that's what's going to help you be successful in the US. So that was an important consideration. And finally, I think it was also about wanting to join an elite school, and the stage at which USC was 2 to 3 years ago. It was really like moving up in the rankings, and it was also again about kind of riding that wave, like we spoke about with the career as well, where you want to be smart in terms of when you take action. So just as it's a great time to be in school right now, it was a great time to get into USC. I think like a couple of years ago when the school was a good school, but it was also a school that was very ambitious and moving up the rankings, as I'm sure a lot of you have seen in recent years. So just a mix of these things, made USC one of my top choices. And then being able to obviously speak with Swetha, who was a student at USC then, and just connect to a few people and go through that interview process convinced me that I'd be a good cultural fit at the school. So if I'm very honest with you, I think you can't really go too wrong with your school selection between like similarly ranked schools and similar schools which are like similar in terms of their I guess career outcomes. Like, oh, these are all like tech, good schools for tech or consulting. So you can use your school selection process, based on what you think is a good cultural fit. Like I'm honestly, feel that like, oh, you pick, USC over a similarly ranked school. It's not like, oh, there's like a big decision to be made in terms of like one being way better than the other in terms of your actual career outcomes. But I think where it can make a difference is, like I said, the cultural fit, where if you know people there, or you've like, done some networking before you joined and you feel that pull towards the school, you should feel confident to take that school.
Yeah, absolutely. I looked at a lot of factors myself in deciding to go to USC Marshall, but then I also looked at what's the average temperature of the city that I'll be living in, because as a Chennai, I'm not going to be surviving very well in a very cold environment. So that was also a factor personally for me, because it mattered. I knew I would end up coming back for the most part. So to me, my lifestyle and my comfort levels when I'm living was also a factor. So it's absolutely, as you said, fine to also take some personal factors into consideration and not just career choices, right?
Absolutely.
And I have another question for you from Ashita, who has 6 years of experience in marketing, looking at how difficult or how possible it is to shift industry.
Sure. I mean, I don't think there's any limitation on the pivot that you can make. And I think marketing is a pretty, standard industry. I'm from a product marketing background myself. So it's a pretty standard way that you can come in with a marketing background and pivot into pretty much anything. Like obviously people like me wanted to get into a more strategic role in tech, but which is, an easy pivot to do in some ways. But I've seen, I mean, there's someone in my class who's a soccer player who's going into like operations. There are, lawyers who are going into consulting. There are people from, there are people from finance who are going into brand management. So it's really not so much to do with, is it possible in terms of like, can a marketing person get into investment banking? Absolutely. Like, and people do that all the time. And that's why they come to business school. If anything, I would say, I've noticed that a lot of companies and generally the culture here really values that idea of pivoting after your MBA. So you might be from a specific industry or function, and you want to either stay in the same industry and get into a different function, or stay in the same function in a different industry, or just change both. And a lot of employers just want to see what your thought process is and what your story is. So I mean, you said you worked in marketing, and maybe you want to say get into say consulting, so a consulting company would just want to know why are you making this change and how you are using your time at the MBA to help you make that change. And yeah, it's in fact with something like marketing or tech, it's so like typical that people come with those kinds of backgrounds and make the pivot. So I wouldn't really worry about the ability to make a pivot from the MBA. That's what people do all the time. So
yeah, in MBA speak, we call it having transferable skills, basically skills that you can take from one job that you have and what lessons you've learned from there and how you can apply it to a different position. Just
absolutely.
for your information, Sid, we talk about these jumps and conversions that you can make, shifting industry or shifting function and so on. And usually the belief is that internationals face more difficulty with making those jump, international students, especially if you want to change both industry and function.
Right.
But
Right.
just going back and circling back to our discussion on how good the market is, the numbers have come out and like 33% or 40% of students from like IESE Spain and HEC Paris and all are making the triple jump. They're changing industry, geography, and function at the same time. So that's another indication this is a phenomenal year, and I was just reiterating the stat, and I wanted to like let you know it's really great out there right now. Do you know people who have written the GRE? So can you take Jemima's question? And do you think there's a difference within your cohort, within your experience, people applying with either the GMAT or the GRE?
I think less so now. I mean, I think the majority of the class still does do the GMAT, but like it,
Right.
I mean, schools don't really, they're not going to like discriminate you just because you have like a GRE score. Like, I mean, if you have a good GRE score, that's just as fine. And yeah, people do, do both. I think schools also publish a statistic on like what percentage of their class applied with a GRE score, versus a GMAT score. In my hunch is that schools are a little more relaxed right now about the exam. And I mean, I could be wrong, but like I think during the pandemic, schools were initially also, thinking about, is how do we attract students to apply? So, they wanted to make sure they don't lose out on applications. Like as it turned out, like schools like USC and some of these other schools actually saw an uptick in their applications. But I think a lot of schools were concerned, whether people would not go to school during the pandemic and not take that big leap. So I think schools became a little more relaxed with, what scores to apply with. And they were pretty accepting of both scores. So I don't think it's a problem, but I mean, but maybe Swetha, you might have more insights into that.
No, I agree. There's definitely fewer percentage of people who apply with the GRE score than applying with the GMAT score. And traditionally, a lot of the ranking calculators have looked at the GMAT score to calculate the average of these school rankings.
Right.
So that was one of the initial reasons for a lot of these schools to be hesitant about accepting GRE scores because they wanted to project a higher GMAT average score. But I think it's now based on student comfort level, take a mock GRE, take a mock GMAT, see what you like about each of the tests, and honestly prepare for what works for you. Personally, I'm a fan of the GMAT, but that's my take on it and what I'm comfortable with. Right? So.
Yeah, and there might be like, I mean, I could be wrong, but there might be a few schools where they only accept the GMAT, like at least in maybe it happens with some, maybe other master's programs where, maybe very few schools might say like only GMAT. So, you also might want to just check in terms of your target schools, just do that sort of check to make sure they accept both scores before you decide.
Right. More actually likely for the MBA programs than for master's programs. So for just a small correction to that. But yes, check into the school and also look at whether the average class profile data is available. But a school might be accepting the GRE score, but they might not publish average GRE scores.
Right.
Which means going in, you're kind of going in blind. You don't know whether the score that you have is an acceptable score for that particular school. Whereas if you have a GMAT score, they'll invariably publish average GMAT score. So you have some sort of a benchmark, right? To see how well you're doing and whether you have any chances of getting a scholarship and all of that given your profile. I have an interesting question then. It's about post-admission stage, right? How would you plan the financial part of it once you got an admission, right? getting an admission is one thing, and then after that, what did you do to prepare for the financial aspects of it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I think that's where even the point made earlier about scholarships comes into the picture. So once you've, which is also why it's good to apply to more than a few schools, not just to improve your chances of getting into a school, but also to see which schools are maybe valuing your profile a little more and willing to give you a better scholarship. I think generally speaking, if you are able to get admissions into one or two of the top schools, you should be able to get into more than a couple of schools. So yeah, I think for me, in terms of making my decision, I was also thinking about like many of us, thinking about the ROI of my investment. We obviously had a lot of data on the salary outcomes from schools, which again tend to be quite similar amongst similarly ranked schools. So I was just considering, especially because I was leaving India and taking on that huge investment. I was trying to see which is the best way to optimize my ROI. So I picked a school where I got a good scholarship, and maybe if anything, maybe an area where I ended up spending a little more was that I picked to live in a city like LA, which is obviously more expensive than, say, if you picked a school in a smaller university town. But I guess in my case, a huge driver of my decision was to be able to live in a global city. So I think your choices and your circumstances will largely dictate which school you end up taking. But I think it's good to start doing that research even before you apply, rather than wait after you get your admissions, in the sense that, like in my case, it was not that after I got my admission, I was then figuring out my finances, but I had started that process as I was applying, just to get an idea of, what it would cost to do an MBA in a specific school, because the tuition itself does vary from school to school, and it actually gets higher as you move up the rankings, for generally speaking. And you also want to consider living expenses, which can be so different if you're in New York or LA versus say like Ithaca or something. So you want to kind of do that process as you are applying, maybe right after the GMAT, before you start applying and filtering schools, because and then just use your post decision period to just evaluate maybe scholarships and make that decision, rather than starting from scratch. Whether you want to finance through a loan, do you want to you want to start thinking about that a little earlier, probably.
Right. Network actually kicks in, okay? Once you get that admission, you have other peers who are going through the same process. You have alumni or seniors from previous classes, previous cohorts that you can talk to. And so you can gain, kind of get some information from their experience as well. What sort of financial assistance did they go for? And what sort of loans did they go for? What's a good company, what's not, and so on. So that kicks in, and thankfully you have enough support for most schools there at that stage. We have a question from Tina. I'm going to quickly answer. I'll answer the question first, because it's about doing an undergrad in the US with scholarship, and I guess Tima from Bangladesh.
Right.
Tima, if you are preparing for an undergrad program in the US, it doesn't matter whether you're going for a business undergrad or anything, whatever you're majoring in, you should be preparing for the SAT and not the GMAT. The GMAT is specifically for postgrad programs, like doing your master's in business or in management or whatever. So really encourage you to check out SAT, SAT. The College Board is the website, the person who conducts the test. So check out College Board and really work on your SAT scores and preparation. Tima, if you have a good score and if you can show need for financial assistance, you will be able to get an admit with scholarship for undergrad programs. Right. We have a question from Jemima asking, what did you upskill? What did you work on after you got an admission? Like in the engineering degree?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I think in my case, as someone who came from a marketing background and had more, I guess, creative and qualitative skills, I did do a little bit of upskilling in terms of, building more analytical and technical skills around subjects like finance. I don't think it's highly critical in terms of it's not like you have to do this after you get an admission Because I mean, the course itself starts off like from, like from scratch in terms of like something like finance. So it's not like the finance or the academic course load is heavy and you need to come in with prior knowledge. In my case, because I had some extra time, because I deferred my admission, I was just building up some skills, which I felt were lacking in me. But I was also looking at that extra year that I had when I deferred to take up other kinds of projects. I did a freelance consulting project, and I was like doing a few online courses. So, and also in terms of my work, I continued working. So I took up different kinds of projects to, gain different skills and, improve my profile or resume, so to speak. I wouldn't really say like, I mean, if you get an admission, say in March and you're joining in July, I would say like, don't do any upskilling, like, take some time off, like, spend time with your family. Like, don't really stress about like upskilling before the MBA in those final 2 months, because you've worked for a few years and you've, done a lot of good things, which is why you got into a good MBA program. And the program is super intense from day one in terms of like, there's just so much going on. So you want to be fresh when you come in. Right. And I genuinely think it's not necessary like to prepare to be good at finance in the course or accounting in the course, because the course starts from like almost assumes like nothing in accounting and starts from scratch. And the emphasis, I mean, like, I don't want to like cut up like the incoming class MBA classes, but like the course is not about the academics. Like, it's really not about I need to get a good grade in finance. Like nobody cares in terms of like your recruiting outcomes, right? Like study well is like a good like general principle to live by, but like that's not the emphasis of the program. And I mean, it was new to me as well, because I think obviously coming from India, our huge focus is, you need to study, get good grades, and only then you'll get a good job. But the MBA in the US is really not designed to like make you a nerd, so to speak. Like it's it's amazing professors, amazing lectures, and I've learned a lot from it. But there's never a concern about like, should I like learn finance and only then I can keep up with the class? Like they literally start and they teach you stuff like how simple interest works. Like, I mean, it's really first principles, and it's not a specialized master's where, you might need extra technical knowledge to do well on the course. Like the MBA is like a generalist course. It gives you like a little bit of exposure into different things without going too deep. So yeah, I know it was a long-winded answer, but yeah, like I wouldn't stress too much about upskilling after you get an admission. Like you can do a lot, of course, like as you work and like, try to improve your skills. But once you get an admit, it's fine.
Not a long-winded answer, Sid, and I think that is something that really must be said, rather than it's not taking away from the incoming class, because it's very cultural fit is very important, right? We talk about how if you go to a school in Germany, it's important for you to learn German so that you can survive there.
Yeah.
Similarly, if you're going to a school in the US or anywhere else, you need to adapt to that environment, right? And if even the US academics takes a backseat, and networking and all of that other factors that you were mentioning are center, then that's what you need to focus on. So yeah, it's perfectly fine that I guess take a backseat. Right. I want to actually go back to ask a question from me about your GMAT preparation time, because most of our audience are probably people who are preparing for the GMAT. There are lots of questions about the application stage, very valid and helpful. But let's talk about, if you remember your GMAT prep stage, personally for you, do you remember what was the kind of like the difficulty that you faced, and how did you overcome it? Do you have any like tips and helpful techniques that you will be able to share with us?
Yeah, for sure. So I think as most of you, as you prepare for the GMAT, you quickly identify which are your strengths and weaknesses. So I think in my case, I was better at the verbal section than the quant section, and so my focus in terms of preparation was a little more skewed towards like improving my quant my quant score. One thing that I realized through the preparation was that the mocks that the GMAT provides are so good and so important to do, because I remember going into the exam and I was like, oh, this is exactly like how the mock was, honestly, like it was so similar to that. And I think what was really important was more that GMAT doesn't actually take several months, or like it's not like, I guess, like um maybe like a CAT or some other competitive exam where you need like a long run of preparation. But I think the GMAT is more about like those few months that you do prepare, you want to be consistent. It's not even that you need to put in like 7 hours a day. I mean, definitely not so much. Like, you just, it's more about consistently working every day. So making sure that on the day of the exam, your mind is sharp. Your as soon as you see a question, your thought process kicks in, and you're quickly capturing information and being able to solve the question quickly. So I think with regards to preparation, I think it's more consistency, that you want to keep doing your prep on a daily basis leading up to the exam. I think it's also important to figure out what is the best time for you to take it, especially if you're a working professional. So maybe that like that August to September period is maybe a little light for you in your job. So, you want to plan in advance so that you can dedicate time leading up to the exam to prepare. What I found very useful I remember from a verbal point of view was actually the material that, Wizako had given me, because I found that significantly, there was a lot of questions that were significantly harder than what you might get in the GMAT. So being able to do that then meant that, the GMAT questions were a lot easier. So if I remember, like there were a lot of these sentence correction questions, which would test maybe 2 or 3 concepts in one question. And once I was able to do that, then the actual questions on the GMAT looked a lot easier for me. And for quants, I was on the other end of the spectrum, I guess, where I was, a little weaker in that section, and I had to like build myself up. So in that case, I again found that both the Wizako prep material and also what the GMAT provides in their official prep, I took a lot of the easier questions then to get more confident. So I think it's more about knowing what you're good at and where you want to improve. For me in verbal, it was, okay, I'm better at it, so let me just do the really hard questions and then feel confident about the easier ones. Whereas in quants, it was really starting from, I guess, the more basic questions and feeling confident going into the exam. So yeah, I mean, happy to answer more specific questions on that though.
Have one follow-up. People ask me usually how many questions I would recommend that they practice in order to have a good score, and I'm never able to tell them that, because I don't think that it's specific for one person, like there's one universal answer. But I can ask you for your experience, right?
Sure.
Personally, for you, approximately how many questions would you have practiced for like the quant and the verbal section, and do you remember how much you improved? Like,
sure. Yeah, I think that second part of your question actually was the answer, that it's less to do with like how many questions did you practice versus like how much, like what accuracy was your target, and like did you improve from 50% to 90%? Because I think, as an example, like maybe like I was very strong in, say, percentages, just had like a good intuition around that. So maybe it was enough for me to even just practice 10 questions, know that I'll get all 10 right. And then I don't want to waste time, reaching a question target of like 100 or something for that topic. Whereas I was weaker in, say, like geometry, so yeah, right?
I completely sympathize with that.
Yeah, because it's like, I don't know, like that's like each figure, like a rhombus has different rules, a rectangle has different rules. And like, so for me, that was like a lot more challenging. So in that case, 10 questions or maybe even 50 or 100 questions may not be enough for me, right? And it was the same, I think, with even when I look at verbal, where I didn't need as many questions for preparation in verbal, but I needed like a lot more in quants. So I think it's more important to set that that accuracy target, where if I pick 10 or 20 GMAT level questions for a specific topic, can I get that 85 to 90% of them right? If I'm not able to get it, keep working on it until I get it. So you would obviously know that as you prepare that, I'm good at this, so I'm always getting consistently like 95% of the questions right. Then you don't really want to waste too much time just picking more questions from that topic. So yeah, I think it's and probably Swetha, you would have a better gauge on what is that right accuracy that one should target. But I would assume it's like, closer to that 90%, where if you're getting 90% of the questions in a topic right, you shouldn't really worry about it. And for a topic that you are not, you want to keep taking sets of questions until you're able to reach that level of accuracy.
Yeah, I agree. 85 to 90% is a good target. Absolutely.
Yeah.
As far as the accuracy goes. I'll get one question from the chat, Sid, and then we'll let you go and actually begin your day. How important were the application essays, and how did you work on them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the applications essays are an important component to the exam, to the admissions process. It's almost like there are two parts to it, right? Like you first get the GMAT out of the way, and then you have to like focus on the more qualitative side of your application process, which is the essay. I mean, I will point out that the GMAT score with a good essay is like that dream combination, because anything you write is just viewed a lot better, like almost like a halo effect where, this person is saying all this and has like a 740 on the GMAT, just sounds a lot better compared to like if you have like a slightly lower score and then you're just writing, then it's like, oh, is this like fluff or is this like like legit? I mean, that's just an aside, but no, the admission essays are extremely important because a lot of schools want to see what was your thought process into coming to the MBA. Essentially, they want to know the parts of your application that cannot be quantified in a resume, right? Like, what was your story? Like, what did you do before the MBA? What do you want to do after the MBA? And how's the MBA going to help you get there? So I think the essays are extremely important, and especially I think for US schools, because there's this strong sense of storytelling that is valued in the US, and as a business school student, you're expected to be able to communicate your thought process with a lot of clarity. I took a lot of help from Wizako for my application process in terms of both identifying schools and also vetting my essays to make sure that I was communicating like my story and my value proposition in the best way possible. There's obviously like no perfect way to do an essay because it can really vary from person to person. So it's almost like a tailor-made thing. Like you obviously cannot, like, my essay cannot be copied by someone else like for success, because like we have different stories. But no, I mean, like the long story short is the essays are definitely like an integral part of the application process. Having a good GMAT score with the essay just makes your essay itself look better. But yeah, I think the essay, the schools do value it, and they do read through your essays, and they want to see, they're obviously they're not judging you based on your language, but it's more that clarity in communication and your thought process in being able to say, like I said, what you've done before the MBA, what you want to do, and how the MBA at that specific school is going to help you get there. So yeah, you definitely want to focus on it, but it's also not something you want to focus on before you finish the GMAT, at least in my opinion. Like I wouldn't really overthink the essay like before getting a good GMAT score. Like, get the GMAT score, like get that out of the way, and then you can work on your essay with a lot more confidence as well.
Follow up for that, not overthink the essay part is what you kind of ended up with, but how long do you think, even if you think normally and don't overthink it, how long did it take you to get your essay done?
I think it would depend on, like, it obviously would depend on, once you have like a general story, then it's very easy to recreate it for different schools and just like make small tweaks. Like if you're going to New York, you might, say something that you really liked about New York. Or if you are going to, a school that is renowned for a specific, program, like, like a student investment fund that is really reputed in that school, then you might want to bring that in. But I think like, it didn't take very long for me because I had a few like good conversations with, with like people at Wizako, where I was able to bounce off my ideas and just get that clarity on, oh, this is what I want to communicate. Like once you do that, the writing process is honestly not so hard, right? Like once you know what you want to say, then, it could just be a few days even to actually write it out. But I think it's more that initial, like that those discussions you can have with people where you can bounce off ideas and be able to bring a structure to your story, like be able to clearly communicate what you've done, without being like, just bullet points and, oh, I worked on this project with a large CPG firm. Like that's not how your essay should be. But to just be able to discuss with someone like what is a cohesive flow. And I know we spoke at the start about, knowing exactly what you want to do. And many of us, including myself, didn't know that. So, sometimes having these conversations can just help you pick a path that you at least, use in terms of your MBA process. Like that really does not have to be what you eventually end up doing. Because I know, like in my essays, I spoke a lot about how I wanted to work in like consumer facing tech companies like Uber or DoorDash, like, those tech-enabled companies in like a growth role. And I'm not doing that, in my internship. But, you want to be able to narrow in on something that you can talk about during the essay. So it's good to go about that process in a structured way by having conversations with people, bouncing off ideas, figuring out like, these 7 or 8 bullet points is what I want to put in my essay in this order. And then writing it out is not like a challenge, honestly. Like that's the easy part.
Perfect. Thank you, Sid. So do you have any last thoughts that you want to share? Anything that you wish that I or the people in the chat had asked? Anything you want to say, or shall we call it a day?
I guess, if anything, like I think in my own experience, I think the MBA itself is like a truly life-changing experience, and that goes beyond just your academic aspect or like your recruiting aspect. Like I think especially like most of us here as international students, like when we are moving to another country, like I think what you get out of the 2 years is something that is lifelong and that comes with you. And in that sense, I think you should really be super excited to be doing this more than anything, because there's academics, there's the social life, there is the recruiting, there are the extracurriculars, there's the travel. But all of this put together is what makes the MBA what it is. Like it's way beyond just a course where you come to study, get a job. Like sure, like that's the main outcome that we're all looking for as international students. But I think being excited about it is really important. Like you want to, you're doing something that's going to help you literally for the next 20 or 30 years of your professional journey. So approach it with that excitement. Like I think, like at least for someone like me, like the GMAT was like maybe like the roadblock to my MBA, in the sense that I was not someone who enjoyed writing like exams, and like not the biggest fan of like tests and these competitive exams. So but the way I got myself to do it was by just getting excited about if I just work for like those 2 or 3 months, I get this out of the way, and then I have this amazing, like truly life-changing experience that awaits me. So and that's what it really is. It's lived up to that hype. Like a lot of people, like including you, like you all hyped the US MBA and like got me like excited about it. But I think it's also lived up to that hype in terms of what this is about, and what it's about is beyond just a degree. It's like this big experience that anyone who has the means should do it if they can, and you won't regret it. Like this is like a great experience.
That's beautifully said, Sid. I've known you for 4 years. I'm very happy that we had this live conversation, and it's been absolutely wonderful being a part of your life journey and the relationship that we have built. And I still remember us sitting in USC Village when we first came there, and then chatting for hours into the night till they kicked us out. So I'm really glad that we have built this relationship, moving from student teacher to really good friends. And I'm very happy that we did this. So thank you for being part of this live Q&A. So I'm going to end this USC Marshall style and say, fight on.
Yeah, fight on to everyone.
All right. Have a good day, Sid. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.